In October of 1918, as World War I ground toward its brutal conclusion, the officers of the 82nd Infantry Division were facing a problem. They had a position to take, a German machine gun nest in the Argonne Forest, entrenched deep, protected by barbed wire and prepared fields of fire. The position was killing Americans faster than they could be replaced. And they had a man for the job, except nobody wanted him. His name was Alvin York. He was 30 years old, a farmer from Tennessee with a third-grade education and a conscience that made killing seem like a sin. The Army said he was too uneducated to be trusted with important missions. His officers said he was too religious, too conflicted, too much of a liability. The men under his command said he was too quiet, didn't look like a leader, didn't look like much of anything. What nobody knew, what nobody could have predicted, was that this one man, with nothing but his rifle, his pistol, and a handful of hand grenades, would walk into that forest and walk out, having killed over 20 German soldiers and captured 132 prisoners. He would do it so impossibly well that military tactics would never be the same again. This is his story.
To understand what happened in that forest, you have to understand where Alvin York came from. He was born on December 13, 1887, in a two-room log cabin in Pall Mall, Tennessee. Not a town, not even a village, just a fold in the Cumberland Mountains where people tried to survive. His father was William York, a blacksmith who farmed when he had time. His mother was Mary Brooks York, who bore 11 children and sewed every stitch of clothing the family wore by hand. Alvin was the third child, the oldest boy. By the time he was old enough to understand what poverty meant, he was old enough to help prevent it. He hunted, he fished, he worked the farm, he did anything that would keep his family from starving. And he became a shot. Not through training, not through military instruction, but through necessity. A missed shot meant going hungry. A poor shot meant money wasted on ammunition the family couldn't afford. By the time he was 12, Alvin York could shoot the head off a turkey at 50 yards. By the time he was 16, he was winning shooting competitions across the mountains. By the time he was 20, he was known throughout Fentress County as one of the finest marksmen anyone had ever seen. But Alvin York's life was not going well. His father died in 2011 when Alvin was just 23. Suddenly, the burden of supporting his mother and younger siblings fell entirely on him. He worked mining jobs, he worked farm labor, he drank heavily to ease the stress. He gambled, he got into fights. He became known around Pall Mall as a hellraiser, the kind of man who would drink himself stupid on a Saturday night and wake up Monday morning wondering what he'd done. He was, by every measure, a man without a future. But in January of 1915, something changed. Alvin attended a revival meeting of the Churches of Christ and Christian Union. It was a fundamentalist congregation, strict, demanding, uncompromising in its faith, and something about their message reached him. That night, Alvin York made a decision. He joined the church, and when he joined, he committed to everything they stood for. He gave up drinking, all of it. He gave up gambling. He gave up fighting. He gave up smoking and chewing tobacco. He gave up women outside of marriage. He gave up every vice that had been his life for the past decade.
A preacher asked him later how he'd managed it. York said, "When I quit all." He was now 27 years old, and his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. 2 years later, on June 5, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson announced the draft for World War I. Alvin York registered like every other man his age, but he immediately filed for conscientious objector status. His religious faith forbade killing. War was wrong. He was a Christian now, a believer in nonviolence. His request was denied. In September 1917, Alvin York reported to Camp Gordon, Georgia, to join the 328th Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Infantry Division. He arrived as a private with a third-grade education and a conscience that told him killing was a mortal sin. His commanding officer was Major Edward Buxton, a deeply religious man himself. Buxton looked at this hillbilly farmer from Tennessee and saw something others missed. He saw a man caught between two truths, his faith and his duty. Buxton spent weeks talking to York. He quoted scripture. He argued that a just war was not murder. He told York that defending his country against an unjust enemy was not a sin. It was a duty. It was a test of faith. Eventually, York asked for a few days of leave. He went home to Tennessee. He prayed. He fasted. He wrestled with his conscience in a way that very few men ever have to. When he returned to Camp Gordon, he had made his peace. He was a soldier now. But he was still a farmer. What became immediately obvious was that the Army had no idea what to do with a 29-year-old hillbilly farmer who was the finest marksman any of them had ever seen. York could shoot, not like a trained soldier shoots, like a hunter shoots, smoothly, naturally, without overthinking it. He didn't aim like he was taught. He aimed like he had been shooting for food since he could walk. His rifle instructors were baffled. He was breaking every rule they had taught him, and yet he was hitting targets that younger men couldn't come close to. By the spring of 1918, Corporal Alvin York was promoted to corporal. He was given command of an automatic rifle team. His men respected him not because he yelled or threatened them, but because they could see he was something different. He was calm. He was deliberate. He was a killer in the way that a hunter is a killer, efficient, without emotion, focused on the task. In May 1918, Corporal Alvin York shipped out to France with the 82nd Infantry Division. He was 30 years old, the oldest soldier in his squad, the least educated, the most unlikely to make a difference. Nobody knew it yet, but the war was about to meet its match. By October 1918, the Germans knew the war was lost. They were surrounded. The Allies controlled the skies and the seas. Every day, more Americans poured into France. Every day, the noose tightened. But the German army didn't surrender. It dug in. The Argonne Forest became one of the last great battlefields of the war, a dense tangle of woods where visibility was measured in feet, where positions were interconnected through trenches and barbed wire, where machine guns commanded entire valleys. On October 7, 1918, the 82nd Infantry Division entered the Argonne. They were tasked with capturing a critical road junction, a place called Hill 223. The Germans had fortified the heights and placed machine guns at every approach. Corporal York's company was ordered to attack. At dawn on October 8th, York's company advanced into the forest with 17 men in the patrol. They were supposed to locate the German machine gun nests and report back. Simple reconnaissance. Instead, they walked directly into a prepared ambush. The German gunners opened up without warning. The first burst of machine gun fire caught the American patrol in the open. Men screamed. Men fell. Within seconds, half the patrol was down, either killed or too wounded to continue. The remaining men dove for cover. They scrambled into a shallow ravine and took what defensive positions they could. But they were trapped. The German machine guns commanded the entire valley. Any man who tried to move would be cut down. Corporal York was pinned down with about 7 other surviving men. They had become, in military terms, a small island of Americans in a sea of Germans. That's when something remarkable happened. Instead of waiting for reinforcements that might never come, instead of accepting surrender, York made a decision. He was going to attack. Not with grenades, not with a bombing run, not with cover fire and coordinated assault. Alone. York stood up and climbed out of the ravine. He was completely exposed. The German gunners saw him immediately and opened fire. Bullets snapped past his head. They tore up the ground around him. They cut through the trees. And York kept walking forward. He wasn't running. He wasn't charging. He was walking the way a hunter walks when he's stalking prey, deliberate, calm, focused. When he got close enough, he stopped. He raised his rifle and he started shooting. The Germans had never seen anything like it.
a single American soldier advancing on a fortified position, firing shot after shot with mechanical precision. The American was in the open. There was nowhere to hide, and yet every shot he fired killed or wounded a German soldier. York fired at the machine gunners. When one would take cover, he would shift fire to another nest. He was controlling the entire battlefield with nothing but his rifle and the fact that he could shoot better than any man the Germans had ever faced. The German commander made a decision. This one American with his rifle was more dangerous than an entire battalion. If they didn't stop him, he would kill them all. He began moving toward York with a group of German soldiers, attempting to rush the American and bayonet him before he could reload. That's when the grenades came into play. York pulled a grenade from his belt. He pulled the safety pin with his teeth, the way all soldiers learned, and he tossed it underhand toward the advancing Germans. The grenade detonated, scattering the Germans. But York didn't wait for the shock to wear off. He switched tactics immediately. He drew his Colt .45 pistol from its holster. The German officer leading the charge was coming directly at him, bayonet fixed. York waited until the officer was almost on top of him, and then he fired. The .45 caliber round hit the German officer in the chest. He dropped. The other Germans coming behind him saw their officer fall. They saw this American standing in the open with a smoking pistol, eyes calm and focused. They saw him reload the pistol, saw him pull another grenade from his belt. They stopped advancing. Some of them put their hands up. What happened next is recorded in different ways depending on who tells the story, but the basic fact is undisputed. Corporal Alvin York captured 132 German soldiers. He did it with 7 other Americans providing covering fire. He did it with a handful of grenades and a pistol. He did it by being calm when every instinct should have made him panic. But more than that, he did it by understanding something that nobody else understood in that moment. Grenades and cover fire don't win battles. Psychology wins battles. When you throw a grenade properly, not as a random act of desperation, but as a calculated, measured, deliberate action, you accomplish 3 things. First, you create a tactical disturbance. The explosion disrupts the enemy's defensive fire. Second, you create psychological shock. Men who think they're safe suddenly realize they're not. That shock makes them vulnerable. Third, you create an opening for decisive action. While the enemy is reacting to the explosion, you move, you advance, you control the battlefield. York understood this intuitively. He wasn't a tactical genius. He didn't read military manuals. He understood it the way a hunter understands it, the way you move and act when you're trying to bag an elk or a deer. By mid-morning, York and his 7 men had herded 132 German soldiers back toward American lines. The position was secure. The road to the German rear was open. The greatest one-man feat of arms in American military history had taken less than 4 hours.
The army didn't know what to do with Corporal York at first. His account of what happened seemed impossible. 1 man against a German machine gun nest, capturing 132 prisoners? It had to be exaggerated. It had to be a lie, or at least a serious distortion. So they investigated. They sent officers to the Argonne Forest. They interviewed the 7 men who had been with York. They examined German records and casualty lists. Everything checked out. More than that, the surviving German soldiers were found, and when asked what had happened, they told the same story. 1 American, 1 rifle, 1 pistol. 1 man who seemed to have supernatural calm and supernatural accuracy. On October 8, 1918, Alvin York was promoted to sergeant. Over the following months, as the war ended and soldiers came home, the true impact of what York had done became clear. Military strategists around the world began analyzing his tactics. How did he do it? What was the secret? And the answer was something that nobody expected. There was no secret. York won that engagement through a combination of factors that were all teachable, all learnable, all reproducible. First, superior marksmanship. York's ability to hit what he was aiming at was extraordinary, but it came from hunting and practice, not from something innate that couldn't be taught. Second, decisive action under pressure. York didn't freeze, he didn't hesitate. When the moment came to attack, he acted. This is something any soldier can learn. Third, tactical use of explosives. York understood that grenades weren't just weapons, they were psychological tools. Deployed correctly, they could break an enemy's will to fight without killing everyone. Fourth, exploitation of momentum. Every time York moved, he moved decisively. He didn't give the Germans time to reorganize. He didn't give them time to mount a coherent defense. Within a decade, York's tactics had become standard training for American infantry. Officers studied his Argonne Forest action in war colleges. Enlisted men learned grenade-throwing techniques based on what York had demonstrated.
The grenade was no longer just a defensive weapon, a thing you threw from a trench when enemies attacked. It became an offensive weapon, a tool for controlling territory, a way to break enemy formations. Military theorists called it the combined arms approach, using multiple weapons in coordinated fashion, using cover fire and explosive ordnance together. It sounds obvious now, but in 1918 it was revolutionary, and it came from a 30-year-old farmer from Tennessee. But York's war wasn't over yet. On November 1st, 1918, just days after the Argonne Forest action, Corporal York was wounded by artillery fire. Not seriously, but seriously enough to send him to a hospital in France. By the time he recovered, the war was over. The armistice was signed on November 11th. Alvin York, the third-grade educated farmer from Tennessee, had become the most decorated American soldier of World War I. In April 1919, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He also received the Distinguished Service Cross. The French gave him their highest military decoration. The Italians did the same. The British honored him. But the Army promotion officers didn't know what to do with him. He was a sergeant now, yes, but he was 31 years old. He had a third-grade education. By every measure, he was unsuited for the kind of positions officers typically aspired to. So they quietly shuffled him out of the Army and sent him home.
When Alvin York came home in the spring of 1919, he came home as a hero. The New York Times called him the war's biggest hero. General John J. Pershing, commander of all American forces in France, called him the greatest civilian soldier of the entire war. In Tennessee, he was received like a returning king. The governor came to meet him. The Nashville Rotary Club organized a massive reception. Businessmen who had never spoken to Alvin York before were suddenly calling him their friend. And they offered him something: a farm. The Tennessee businessmen and civic leaders had raised thousands of dollars to purchase land for their greatest son. They wanted to set him up for life. They wanted to make sure that Alvin York, the boy from the log cabin who had fought in the forests of France, would never go hungry again. York accepted. In 1919, he married Gracie Williams, a young woman from his hometown. The Nashville Rotary helped finance the purchase of a 400-acre farm in Fentress County, just a few miles from where he was born. For the next few years, Alvin York tried to be a farmer again. He tried to put the war behind him. He tried to be just another man tilling soil and raising livestock. But he wasn't just another man, and Tennessee knew it. Filmmakers came calling, wanting to make a movie about his exploits. York refused at first.
His religious beliefs told him that profiting from violence, even from heroism in combat, was wrong. He spent his time instead on what really mattered to him: education. In 1926, York and the people of Fentress County founded the Alvin York Agricultural Institute. It was a school for rural children who would otherwise have no access to higher education. It was York's way of making sure that no other child from the mountains would have to grow up illiterate the way he had. He also established the Alvin York Foundation, which worked to improve roads, schools, and living conditions throughout the mountain regions of Tennessee.
Here was a man who had proven himself one of the greatest soldiers who ever lived. And what he chose to do with his fame and resources was help children learn. In 1941, after more than 2 decades of refusal, Alvin York finally allowed Hollywood to tell his story. The movie Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper, was released to massive acclaim. It was that year's highest-grossing film. Gary Cooper won the Academy Award for Best Actor. The film came out just as America was entering World War II. And in that moment, when the nation needed to believe in the heroism of ordinary men, Alvin York's story reminded America of what was possible. But York himself had moved on. He lived the rest of his life on that farm in Tennessee. He raised his family there. He ran his foundation from there. He became involved in veterans affairs, helping other soldiers readjust to civilian life the way he had struggled to. His greatest achievement, he came to believe, wasn't killing Germans in the Argonne Forest. It wasn't the medals or the acclaim or the movie about his life. His greatest achievement was the school, the York Agricultural Institute, because that school changed the lives of thousands of children. It gave opportunities to kids who would have grown up illiterate in the mountains of Tennessee. It proved that you could take a place that had nothing, no resources, no advantages, and make it into something beautiful. York was asked late in life about his most famous moment. He said something that surprised people. He said he didn't like to talk about the Argonne Forest, that all that killing, even though it was necessary, even though it won the war, wasn't anything to celebrate. What he wanted people to remember wasn't that one man could kill a lot of enemy soldiers. He wanted them to remember that one man could change a lot of lives through education. Alvin York died on September 2, 1964, in Nashville, Tennessee. He was 76 years old. He died a farmer in the state where he was born, surrounded by the people he had spent his life trying to help.
What makes Alvin York's story different from other soldiers' stories is that he didn't stop being heroic when the war ended. He didn't cash in on his fame. He didn't write endorsement deals or make money from his image. When Hollywood wanted to make a film about him, he didn't do it for decades, only when he felt the country needed inspiration. What he did do was change the way wars are fought. The tactics York developed, the combination of accurate fire and well-placed grenades, the understanding of explosive ordnance as much as a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, these became the foundation of modern infantry tactics. Every officer trained at West Point in the decades after World War I learned about Alvin York. Every enlisted man trained to throw grenades learned from tactics York had pioneered. The way America fights today, with combined arms, with integrated firepower, traces back to one 30-year-old farmer in the Argonne Forest who understood something about human nature that the professional military had never quite grasped. Psychology beats firepower. Will beats training. Courage beats numbers. A statue of Alvin York stands on the grounds of the Tennessee State Capitol. It was dedicated in 1968, 4 years after his death. The inscription doesn't mention his medals. It doesn't mention the prisoners he captured or the Germans he killed. It says simply, a civilian soldier. Because that's what he was, a man who wasn't born to war, who had to overcome his own faith to fight, who did what was necessary when necessity demanded it, and who then came home and spent the rest of his life making sure that the next generation wouldn't have to suffer what he had suffered. They said he was too old to fight. They said he was too uneducated to command respect. They said he was too religious to be a soldier. They were wrong about all of it. Alvin York was exactly the man the moment needed, and what he proved wasn't that one man can be a hero in combat. He proved that being a hero is only the beginning.